To the Point with Michael Williams.
Coming off the International Coastal Cleanup, we're looking at the conditions of our beaches and the potential long-term impact of the coastal cleanup. Good morning, everyone. I'm Tori Dunnan in for Michael Williams. This year, we've been focusing a lot on environmental issues with our Protecting Paradise reports. And one of the big environmental events of the year is the International Coastal Cleanup. So joining me today to talk about our beaches and the campaign to improve our environment are Lourdes Ferris of Keep Palm Beach County Beautiful, and also Kelly Martin with Palm Beach County's Environmental Resources Management. Thank you both for coming in. We were just talking about this a little bit off the air, but tell us about the conditions of the beaches right now after Hurricane Dorian and just kind of where we stand at this point.
The conditions of the beaches are highly variable, but right now we're seeing a lot of debris on the beaches. And that ranges from things like microplastics, tiny bits of plastic material, all the way up to large fishing debris, derelict fishing debris, things like that. And there's quite a bit of it washing up at this point.
Have you seen it in certain locations, maybe more than others?
Right now, it seems to be a countywide problem.
Really?
We're seeing it everywhere, yes, which is why events like the coastal cleanup are really important.
Okay, and do you think that's from the hurricane or just a mix of?
Unfortunately, it's an ongoing problem. Whether or not the hurricane has caused a surge in the amount of debris that we're seeing on the beach right now, it's hard to say, but it is, it's an annual ongoing problem.
And Lourdes, you've really coordinated a lot of these coastal cleanups. Can you tell us about the impact of having organized events and people going out there? Does it make a big difference?
I think so. I think once people go out there themselves and participate in these cleanups, it's as much of a hands-on event as it is an educational event. And especially if they bring their families, they realize there's a problem. And what we're hoping is that they make this a part of their daily lives, that every time they go out to the beach that they bring a trash bag with them and pick up, because as Kelly said, this is an ongoing problem. It's just not a one-day event, and that they make changes in their own lives to try to reduce waste, because things that get thrown away, even in the interior, land up sometimes in the water.
What types of debris are you seeing on the beaches right now in trash?
I think the number one item that was picked up in 2018 was small bits of plastic. The International Coastal Cleanup is not only a cleanup, but it's very much a citizen scientist program an effort in the fact that the volunteers are actually recording what they're picking up, either through the Ocean Conservancy's CleanSwell app or through paper data cards. So we get a snapshot of what's out there in the beaches. So the number one item around the world happens to be cigarette butts, which is also plastic fiber.
Right.
But
I see a lot of cigarette butts.
Exactly. But this past year in 2018, the small bits of plastic even superseded the amounts of cigarette butts out there. So that became our number one item. We'll see what happens when I get all the data back for the 2019 cleanup to see what exactly is out there. But the number three item was plastic bottle caps. Okay. So that's also a recent uptick in types of plastic that are out on the beach.
And we often hear about microplastics. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that is and how it affects beaches, but also waterways as well?
Sure. Microplastics are essentially fragments of plastic that have broken down. They could have been larger items at one point, but they are just small pieces of plastic that wash up on the beach that exist in the water. And these are heavily affecting our marine life. A lot of animals are ingesting these. For example, one recent study said that I think upwards of 90% of sea turtle hatchlings that had washed in deceased had some form of microplastic in their gut. So this is having a huge impact on marine life, and it's one of the biggest things we want to focus on right now is cutting back on the amount of plastic. It's not just small plastics either. Obviously, these things are breaking down into microplastics. So cutting back on the amount of plastic that we're using in our everyday lives to prevent it from ending up in our environment.
So you mentioned marine life. Would it also have a negative impact on humans?
Absolutely. It has not only an impact on marine life, but humans as well. You know, our health depends on the health of our oceans. So it's important for us to keep our oceans healthy for our species as well as those that actually live in it.
What are some of the biggest challenges, and you both can answer this, but that you face trying to keep the waterways clean?
I think a big part of it is education, just convincing people, or not even convincing, but making people aware of how much single-use plastics they're using in their everyday lives. You know, a lot of people aren't aware of a lot of the things that they're using and what kind of impact that has. So there's just that education component and awareness component of how your lives are impacting the environment.
And in addition, I think we have to realize we don't live in a bubble, that we're getting a lot of plastics coming into our shores from elsewhere. And there are places that may not have strong solid waste systems. So it's a combination of making our own individual changes and also realizing that somehow we've got to coordinate all this with, you know, other places, because that's coming onto our shores as well.
Do you have a sense of, and this is probably a difficult question, but the sense of a breakdown on, you know, how much trash is being left on beaches by people at the beaches versus what's being washed up? Or
I think it's difficult in the sense that not everything is, we can't trace every piece of plastic, but we know that with what is picked up, that a lot of things are stamped with, you know, and we know that they're coming from foreign shores, from foreign places, and being brought in by the currents to our shores. If Africa can spit out hurricanes and they land up in our shores, surely the currents can bring that trash onto our shores as well. So it's a worldwide problem, and I think we have to tackle it as such. It has to be a worldwide effort to reduce single-use plastics and get a hold of the solid waste situation.
do you think that people's attitudes are changing about the environment and cleaning up our beaches and the coast?
I think so, yes. I think there's more and more awareness lately. I think events like the Coastal Cleanup and a lot of these events that occur throughout the year are making people aware of the impact that we're having on our environment. And I think we're starting to see a shift. It may be a slow process, but I believe we're starting to see more and more progress towards making an impact, yeah.
I feel like I'm hearing about more and more events happening and cleanups.
And I think the key is our youth, honestly, and doing more education with them. And certainly that's why I'm a big proponent of bringing your kids out to events like the International Coastal Cleanup, because we've got to continue this effort with the younger generation, and tying it to wildlife, and especially our sea turtles that we love so much, really makes a big impact, I think, with the kids.
One question I've always had is, if you see just a lot of trash on a beach, like maybe more than you yourself could pick up, is there someone to call or report it to, or is there a way to get that information out?
I mean, I think you can call Keep Palm Beach County Beautiful, and we'll, because we are aware of a lot of our volunteer groups, that we might be able to mobilize a cleanup, and certainly ERM as well.
County Environmental Resources as well, but you can also reach out to it depends on where you're at, but just the local, maybe law enforcement, maybe there's a nonprofit in the area, maybe even just the neighborhood community. If you reached out and said, I recognize the problem here, it's often pretty easy to get a group of people interested in going out and doing a cleanup.
You mentioned bottle caps, so the fact that people are drinking more and more water out of bottles that you can just toss, is that affecting how clean beaches are?
It certainly can be a cause. I mean, we can, in our county, in Palm Beach County, we can recycle our plastic bottles with the caps on.
Okay.
So there should be no reason why this stuff lands up on our beaches. My suspicion is that some of these bottle caps are coming from elsewhere.
Got it. Is there anything that you all want to add before I kind of go into our last question here?
I think one thing, let's not forget that turtle nesting season's not over until, we've got a whole month, right? Until the end of October. So obviously keeping the beaches clean, we've got a lot of storms out there, a lot of wave action and wind that's going to continuously put debris on the beaches. It's not only one day that we go out there and clean, it has to be almost daily.
Yeah,
that we have to get out there and clean the beaches, certainly to help the turtles, but to help other wildlife and ourselves as well.
Yeah.
Do you see coastal pollution getting better or worse? I know that's kind of a tough question because we can't predict the future, but from where it's been to where it is.
It's a tough question to ask right now. I think there's a lot more awareness right now. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better because we're at an age where a lot of things are disposable, and we're just now starting to tackle that issue of reducing your single-use plastic, reducing your impact. So I think we're going to see it get worse before it gets better, but in the long run, I would hope that it does start to improve once people are aware of the impact it has.
What do you think?
I think a lot more work needs to be done, and certainly some of these bans worldwide possibly may help. Some of the initiatives that are occurring locally, such as the plastic straw initiatives that have the bans that have come up recently in some coastal cities, may help, but I think we've got a long way to go, both in education and action.
Do you think that more trash cans need to be put along beaches?
That's kind of a controversial thing. Okay. I know that the county and a lot of their parks has a trash in, trash out philosophy.
Okay.
So
explain that a little bit more.
Well, I mean, in other words, when you bring trash in, you also are taking trash out. Basically. So if people would take care of their own trash and
just bring a bag
and bring a bag and bring it out, then we wouldn't need trash cans, right?
Yeah, like she said, take out what you take in, but also try to eliminate what you're taking out there, because even if it does end up in a garbage bin, even if we do properly recycle it, a lot of times that's not ending up where it should be. It's ending up back in the environment. So.
Thank you both for coming in. I definitely learned a lot from this. Have a great day. And coming up next, what a new poll says about President Trump's strength in Florida. What are Floridians saying about the presidential candidates, plus one of the most talked about issues? That and more when we come back. Now for a roundtable with Mariana Mancuso, a Republican political strategist, and Brian Crowley, our News Channel 5 political analyst. We're talking about polls now because Florida Atlantic University released a new poll of registered Florida voters. As you see here, former Vice President Joe Biden was the top choice among Democrats with 34%. Senator Elizabeth Warren is second with 24%, but that's a big jump since May when she had a 12% in a similar poll. Senator Bernie Sanders is at 14%. All the other candidates are in the single digits. The poll shows Biden's strength is with voters over the age of 50. This question to both of you, what stands out to you in that poll?
Oh, sure. Come to the only one here that's over 50. You know, it's way too early in a Florida poll to decide. There are so many events that are going to happen between now and our primary next year, including the fact that we're going to have Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada primaries. So by the time the election even gets here, most of these candidates won't even be in the race anymore. So I don't really read a lot into this poll. I think those who are paying attention are the ones who are the most reliable people to poll at this point. Most people are playing a very cursory look at this race because the candidates aren't spending any time in Florida to speak of. And when they do come here, it's for private fundraisers for the most part.
It's true.
When we saw the debate the other day, we saw that Elizabeth Warren had a very strong showing. And, you know, she's not trying to get out there and have those soundbite moments, the flash in the pan, the Kamala Harris moments that we've seen in previous debates. And I think that's actually showing her to be more strategic and a leader. She's also released 45 in-depth plans. And last but not least, her selfie game is pretty strong on the campaign trail.
So you're not surprised that the numbers have gone up there?
No, I'm not. I think that she's just being very strategic and meticulous in how she's moving forward, and she's not trying to get into the fray of the squabbling that's going on between all the candidates.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Elizabeth Warren won in Iowa or New Hampshire. That wouldn't shock me. I think intuitively, I think that a lot of the support for Biden is soft. And I think that there are some people who support Biden who just haven't felt comfortable yet with an alternative. And as long as you have polls that continue to suggest that the person most likely to beat Trump is Biden, you know, many Democrats, their number one goal, no matter what the issues are, their number one goal is to replace Donald Trump.
Speaking of, when it comes to President Trump, he has a positive approval rating in the state when both Democrats and Republicans are surveyed. 49% approved his work, while 46% disapproved. That's right within the 3% margin of error. These numbers show the president doing better in Florida than in national polls. So why do you think that's occurring?
Well, when you look at the margin of error, for all practical purposes, they're tied.
Right.
So when you look at the races that we have in Florida, whether you go to the 2000 presidential race that's won by 537 votes, or you go to the most recent race for governor and U.S. Senate, this state, when we have races, they're won by a sliver. So I'm not surprised that they may be tied. And a lot of it's going to depend on which party does the best job of turning out their voters.
We know that Florida for Trump is his to lose in this re-election. He won in 2016 with 1.2% above Hillary Clinton, which is just, it's razor thin, but we've seen large statewide races win by razor thin margins. But the reality is that we've seen that other polls have showed 40% of people that have been polled have said that they felt that his policies are harming the economy and that the economy is slipping. And if the economy continues to slip in the voters' eyes, then that's going to be very difficult for Trump to rise above.
Any other takeaways from that number, or?
No, I would expect Florida to be close. That's our history of being close, and
right.
I think that again, a lot's going to depend on who the Democrats hand Florida as their nominee.
Okay. And one issue that stood out was gun legislation. Universal background checks received overwhelming support from both Democrats and Republicans. 75% said they support universal background checks, with 14% opposing them. So do you think this kind of support might result in the state closing the loophole that says background checks are not needed in private party sales?
Well, I certainly hope so. I think that the polling all around the country shows that there's increasing, almost overwhelming numbers of people who support background checks. Last week there was a 7-year-old girl who went to school, and in their first week of school they did active shooter training. She got so upset about this that she wound up having nightmares for the next 3 nights. That girl happens to be my granddaughter. A friend of hers doesn't want to have sneakers. Her mom was going to buy her sneakers that light up. The child doesn't want that because they're afraid that if they're in the dark and a shooter is in the building, it will make them a target. Wow. Background checks are great, but we need to really think this through, because what damage are we doing to young children that are going through, for some of them, the trauma of this active shooter training?
Well, and Brian points out it's not even the trauma of the actual active shooter, it's the training that is actually instilling the fear in our children. And I think that we have seen a continual national outcry for this. And in Florida alone, 75% of Floridians believe that we need to close this loop and we need to get this done. And we've seen the president on a national level waver on this. And the time to do this is now, not tomorrow, not after the next mass shooting, but today. And if he really wants to solidify his support in Florida, he will come to Florida and say, you know what, the time is now, guys. And I think that a lot of Floridians would get behind him on that.
Interesting. Well, during the past few days, we've had international coastal cleanup, and really worldwide, we've had a climate change protest. Have we basically gotten to the point now where the environment is a big issue in elections?
I think the environment is still largely treated as local. What got people excited about the environment in the last elections were the discharges from the lake. People weren't talking about all the global issues that were involved. And I think one of the problems with the environmental community in Florida, anyway, has always been, worrying about their particular turf, their particular home ground area. And often there's not an overarching message about taking care of all the water bodies in Florida, taking care of all of the springs in Florida, taking care of all of the wildlands in Florida. And we still have a habit in this state and in many other states around the country that for as much as we talk about doing something about the environment, we develop, and we shrink the natural environments. And that ultimately is not helpful either.
Do you think we'll see candidates coming to Florida and talking about whatever environmental issues there might be in whatever city they're in?
I think it's definitely top of mind. There's a nonprofit organization out of Virginia called Republican, and they're climate realists. And what they're doing is they're actually working with Representative Carlos Curbelo in Miami, and they're hosting a webinar this coming week to talk about climate change and how Florida can actually be a beacon of hope and lead this. And we need to. Sadly, while I am an optimist, I think that unfortunately when it comes to voting time, people are going to show up with their pocketbooks, and if it's affecting the bottom line and taking food off of their table, then they will begin to care a little bit more. but the reality is right now it's something we need to focus on, but until it affects the economy or our pocketbooks, we don't really want to pay attention.
Okay, on that note, we will be back in just a moment. All right, welcome back. Now it's time for the closing comments. We'll begin with the Mancuso moment.
So Tuesday is a really exciting day. It is actually National Voter Registration Day. And so I would encourage all our readers, if they haven't, go out and vote and maybe check in on 5 friends to ensure that everyone is registered to vote, because 2020 is sure to be an extremely important year.
Pick your 5 closely, right?
Yes. Right.
Well, speaking of elections, one item they may wound up on the 2020 ballot will be an amendment that will open up Florida's primaries so that instead of voting Republican or Democrat, you'll vote, all the candidates will be on one ticket, and the top 2 vote getters will be on the general election ballot. This is causing great consternation among both Republicans and Democrats, because you could have a scenario where the top 2 vote getters come from the same party. So that could be fascinating. Right? California put this in place in 2010, and if voters go for this, Florida could be next.
Okay, something to think about, right? Well, thank you for spending time with us on today's To The Point. If you'd like to send us your comments about today's broadcast, go to WPTV.com, click on the To The Point page, and you'll see a section to send us your views. Thanks for joining us again, and enjoy the rest of your day.